You know, some people start their day with coffee. Rishad Tobaccowala starts by challenging the premise of everything that we think about when it comes to work. So, this episode with Rishad is going to be like, I think, a triple espresso for me. Hello, Rishad. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, EB, for inviting me, and hopefully it will be a triple espresso. I actually, before I start rethinking everything every morning when I wake up, I have two doppios, so think of those as four espressos.
I have to say that I walk into my Starbucks and they know that they fire up the quad espresso on ice with an extra float of iced coffee on top and a splash of oat milk.
There we are. So those are our drugs of choice. So I basically talk about coffee takeoffs. That's what the morning begins with. And I have two beers in the evening for alcoholic landing.
There we go. I love it. Well, I'm going to take a second to talk about who you are, what you are, and why we're here. This is Insider Interviews, where you get the insider scoop on the business of media marketing and advertising. And this is episode 37 with Rishad Tobaccowala. He is a big name in advertising and marketing. Business Week calls him a top business leader, and Time Magazine has featured him as one of the 5 marketing innovators of choice. And he spent about 37 years and counting at Publicis Group. And he remains there after serving as chief strategist and chairman of Digitas and Razorfish. He remains there as a senior advisor. Now, I am a little bit nervous, not just because he's one of a few hundred people in the Advertising Hall of Fame, but because he also has an advanced degree in mathematics. And Rishad, I failed math in high school and college, or I would have been a psychologist. So now I'm really nervous. Hello.
Hello. And I hated math. I wanted to be a writer.
Really?
And my parents basically said, you will write when you have something to say, but in the meanwhile, learn how to think. And math will teach you how to learn how to think. And so I went from basically hating it to actually doing a degree in advanced mathematics. Yes.
But I'm glad that you did find something to write, because a couple of things, and that's what we want to talk about to start with, and then we'll get into all of your insights about how to corral the future. But you are the author of another new book. Mine is well loved. It's called Rethinking Work. But you started also with another favorite called Restoring the Soul of Business, which is about staying human in the age of data. So let's talk about why you wrote both books. So the first one, Restoring the Soul, and then why Rethinking Work is maybe the next chapter?
Sure. So both these books were written when I began to sense that the given thinking on a topic was not completely right. I wouldn't say it was completely wrong, but was not completely right. And the given thinking in 2018 when I wrote my book was that the thing that was going to matter more than anything else was going to be data. And that we were living in a world driven by math. And as someone who both understood math, since I have an advanced degree in it, and as someone who was involved in acquiring companies like a Sapient and an Epsilon, Epsilon being particularly data driven, I wasn't either anti-math or anti-data. But I basically believed that successful businesses combined the story and the spreadsheet. And we were focusing too much on the spreadsheet versus the story. And actually, the original title of the book was The Story and the Spreadsheet. But my book is published by HarperCollins, and HarperCollins has research teams that come up with different titles. And this was the title that did better. And I think it did better primarily because of the subtitle, which was Staying Human in the Age of Data.
Yes.
And the reality of it is that human beings select or choose with their hearts, and we use numbers to justify what we just did. And that if it was all data driven, then most marketers would not have a job because the machines could do their job better. And by its very nature, a brand is actually very little data. Almost everything is its storytelling. And I often basically say, what is storytelling but data with a soul? Okay. And so it's how do you combine those two? So that was the premise for the book. And the entire book then is an idea of combining things in different ways. But along the way, it goes into discussions on not just the importance of combining story and spreadsheet, but how do you manage change? So people were trying to manage change in unusual ways. How do you make sure that you upgrade your mental operating system so that you can continue to learn? But what was fascinating about book one, which continues to sell very well 5 years later, was that the second chapter of the book and the last chapter of the book, these were the topics. I remember this book was written in 2019, came out in Jan of 2020.
Right.
COVID happened in March of 2020. Right. The second chapter of the book is how do you manage distributed workplaces? How do you manage
distributed workplaces?
So how do you manage when your talent is on a screen and not in the office?
Oh.
Okay. And this was before COVID, because it was obvious to me that modern technology had made the office increasingly irrelevant. And COVID just proved it. That's all it did. Okay. That the technology already was there, but we were pretending that we were using 2002 technology. And the last chapter of the book is about something called AI. Okay. And to a great extent, A is why the reason the book continues to sell very well. And to many extent, people read it as staying human in the age of AI. They don't even read it as staying human in the age of data. And it built the case for my second book. And my second book was people are thinking about work all wrong, just like they were thinking about data all wrong or not right completely.
Yes.
They were thinking about work all wrong. And it was that work is central to the human existence, that work is going to change more in the next 10 years, but people are fixating on things like returning to the office, which is a useless concept, completely useless. And my basic belief is the fact that major leaders are fixating on something so completely useless means I have to write a book. But the book isn't about where you work. It's trying to show that where you work is not got much to do with the future of work, right? And if you really want to prepare for work, so my basic belief is whether you decide to come to the office 5 days a week or 0 days a week, it makes no difference.
Okay.
What you have to really think about is how do you completely rethink the strategy of your firm? How do you think about the organizational design of the firm? How do you retrain everybody? How do you think about leaders versus managers? And those are the hard questions. So instead, people are basically doing things that for all practical purposes are going back to 2019. As we're heading towards 2029, they all want to go back to 2019.
Right, go back to the way we were.
So what are the 4 words that every company uses a lot? Let me tell you what those 4 are. One is we are something of tomorrow. Okay, we are the company of tomorrow. We're the agency of tomorrow, right? We are future. We are future driven. Okay, that's one. Second is they say we are going to be agile. Okay. Right. Third is we believe in personalization at scale or personalization. And fourth, we are deeply talent driven. Those are the 4 words. You go to anybody's website, future, personalized, agility, and talent. Those are the 4 things.
Keyword bingo.
Keyword bingo. Then the same companies basically say, we'd like to get everybody, regardless of your position, to get back into the office. And in effect, we're going not to the future, we're going to the past. We're not going to be agile or flexible. We're going to be fixed. We're not going to care about what talent is thinking. And we're not going to personalize based on either your situation, your level, or the type of work you do. So outside of the fact that you have become anti every single thing you claim, and therefore you become a joke to your entire talent base, everything else otherwise is fine, sir.
And employees, we're bridling at that. We don't want to go back to the office. It's kind of like getting the horse back in the barn.
It is. And in fact, this morning, I host my own podcast, and
Yes, you
today's
do.
guest was a lady called Dr. Angela Jackson, who's just brought out a book called The Win-Win Workplace, and she teaches at Harvard, etc. And she was basically saying it's so obvious that there is a massive disconnect between the boardroom and the talent. And part of the reason, and part of what my book also shows, is most boardrooms have got themselves into an incestuous circle of self-defeating thinking. That's the best way to think about it. I go to boards and say, you're defeating yourself. And I said, world's greatest companies and world's greatest leaders never get defeated. They decide to defeat themselves. And unfortunately, today we're also seeing the United States deciding to follow that particular path of self-defeat. Yes. But my whole basic belief is you cannot go back. You have to go forward. We're living in a globalized, connected, talent-based world. Get used to it.
And yet, as you famously said in your first book and are fond of saying in conversations like this, change sucks.
Yes, it definitely does. It definitely does. So
it's hard.
To me, it is very hard. And in fact, I often talk about how I have, you mentioned I've worked for the same company for 37 and I supposedly left it, but I continue to be an advisor 6 years later. I've lived in the same city. Today I happen to be in Chicago for 45. I've known my wife for 52 years. And so when someone comes and tells me change is good, I say, I'm really happy you can change. I like what I'm doing. Okay. But if you go look at my background and you look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll say, wait a second, this guy seems to be changing things all the time. But he claims he hates it. What's the problem here? Okay. And there is no problem. I do hate it, but the choice is not whether change is good or bad. Mm-hmm. The choice is, while change sucks, irrelevance is even worse.
Can you say that again, please?
While change sucks, irrelevance is even worse. And so I always tell people that when you tell people change is good or change is easy, it's not.
Yeah.
Okay. And the more senior you get, the more successful you get, the more established you get, the harder it is. It's like learning how to cycle when you're older and you fall down, you graze your knee, and everybody makes fun of you and you hurt yourself. Why do you want to do that when you're a senior? Why do you want your colleagues to think you don't know what you're doing? Why do you want to, we go into this mindset, I really don't need to change. I'll do buzzword bingo and I hope to retire before this happens.
Right.
And my whole basic belief is it's too late to retire. Unless you are going to retire in 2024, the future is upon us.
So how do you help us face this change? What are some of the tools or tactics that you talk about in Rethinking Work that we should be embracing?
So I think there are three sets of tools and tactics. The first is let's understand the situation. So my basic belief is let's make this a fact trend, because what I found is that successful individuals and companies learn from either Star Wars or they learn from William Shakespeare. So you can decide which ones you want to go. Okay. So in Julius Caesar, there's a line, take the current when it serves or prepare to lose thy endeavors, which basically means go with the current man or woman. And then in Star Wars, there's a line, may the force be with you.
Yes.
Okay. In my book, I have those two lines and those, a play and the movie put together in the same paragraph. And my daughter who read it says, the reason this book is so much fun to read is you suddenly start talking about plays and you start talking about literature and you start talking about movies, right? And it's not just about exactly Spock and a whole bunch of other things. And so let's understand the trends. Let's understand where the data is. So at least you want to align with the trend. Or if you decide not to align with the trend, be ready to get blown away. And so the first 5 chapters of my book really explains what those 5 trends are, just with facts and with data, right? Okay. And there's nobody who reads the first 5 chapters who comes out and says, oh shit, this is not true. It's true.
Right.
So I said, if you have that, now let's talk about what can be done. And the key thing is the 5 trends are really aging populations, social changes, aging populations, declining populations, multiple generations at work, different mindsets among Gen Z and baby boomers. Then there's obviously technology is a second trend. The rise of marketplaces, like whether it's Uber, Amazon Web Services, Etsy, Shopify, marketplaces. Fourth is the rise of the side gig and the side hustle. More people in the US will earn a 1099 this year than a W-2. Now, some W-2 people earn a 1099. So I'm not saying more people are 1099 than W-2, but there'll be more 1099s than W-2s. And W-2 is what you get when you have a full-time job. And 1099 is when you do what I do, right? So now I have all 1099 and no W-2. And the last one really is the impact of COVID. And the impact of COVID was not as much on where you work, but what you think about your work, how work fits in your life, and what you think of your management.
So how you balance
yes. So the big issue is that people no longer ask, how do I fit life into my work? They ask, how do I fit work into my life?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Especially the up and coming set.
So the whole idea is like, work is part of my life. Life is also there. And I'm not going to basically have life as sort of a, minor part to work. But the other hand, I do recognize that work is important for a lot of reasons, not just income, but for identity, community. The second thing in my book basically says, okay, why don't we look at the 4 biggest things that are happening? And here's what every company has to think about doing. Or if you're an individual, first, most companies will require, or you have to think about yourself being a part-time employee versus a full-time employee. So this is not a freelance worker, fractionalized employee. So someone who gets 100% healthcare, but maybe 60 to 80% of your income or your bonuses. And with the other 20 to 40%, you do whatever you want. You can do your side hustle, side gig, go back to school, look after children, look after parents, decide you don't want to work those 20 to 40%. Now, different people will have different things. Some people will say we have to work 100%. Other people will say we prefer 60 or 80%. But because of things like AI, which is my second concept, a lot of people will not be allowed to work full time. They won't need to work full time. Most companies are going to basically say, I don't need 100% of you. I now only need 80% of you. But instead of laying off 20% of someone's company, why don't you give everybody the chance of basically working 20% less? In fact, when you ask people, would you like to work 20% less or 40% less? So some people will say, I have to work 100% to pay my bills. Other people will say, you know what, I would like to work 40% less. So you could actually end up in a company without doing any severance or any layoffs, reducing your headcount by 20% without laying anybody off. I don't see why companies aren't doing that. The only thing you have to do is you got to figure out how the model is, and you got to basically make sure you give 100% healthcare to people. But if that happens, and there's nothing in the law that says you can't do that, but that I think is going to be a lot of the future of work. So that's where I talk about being a company of one, learning how to basically hone a skill, building a reputation, and building collaborative. Because I've always told people, when you get the little call where your boss wants to see you and HR steps in at the same time, it's too late to update your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I basically tell people is I said, hey, listen, I was successful at Publicis because for the last 20 years I was at Publicis, and I've never left Publicis. Nobody ever gave me a job. I never looked for a job outside. Right. And it's true. Nobody ever gave me a job, which is quite shocking, but nobody did. I set everything up that if I got a call from Maurice Levy and said, okay, Rishad, you're done. Right. I would be ready to step into a new world immediately.
Oh.
Okay. And so what I was doing, I was running other things. So I was inside the company. I was speaking. I was speaking on behalf of the company outside. I was writing first a WordPress blog. So I was starting to experiment with writing. Right. I got Publicis to help me, and they got me outside board seats.
Yes.
Which were where Publicis was involved in the company. So I was doing it for them. Right. So I was building an advising, speaking, writing career while I was inside the company. I was building the credibility and the skill set. I wasn't being paid separately. In most cases, I was representing the company. So I wasn't doing something against the company. I wasn't doing something in the darkness of night. I was aligning. So my whole stuff is, if I get kicked out of here, I'll have something else to do.
You were also making yourself indispensable.
Yeah. But the other reason was, in any company, regardless how great it is, and the company I worked for was and is great, and I had great bosses. But there are always times when you're very senior, you don't have to be senior, there are always times where you kind of say, like, why am I working here? And these clients are stupid, my bosses are stupid, the talent is stupid, everything should be like stopped and I
Yeah.
need to get off, right? What prevented me from doing that was the fact that I knew I could do that. Okay. And so my whole stuff is I'll keep up with this nonsense because if it gets really too bad, I can do my own thing. So when you know you have an exit, you spend much more time trying to solve a problem
Yeah.
because you don't have to run for an exit. Okay, if everything turns south, I do have an exit, but I don't have need to take it. So what I've always told people is I've built an entire company where all my talent, not my talent, but talent who worked with me, became big names, always had outside job offers, and they always stayed longer than I expected them to because they basically said, Rishad, however crazy it is working with you, our reputation keeps increasing. We keep having better opportunities outside, and therefore we'll take the stuff inside, and at some particular stage, we'll go outside.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, and I said, okay, when you do, try not to go to a competitor, and almost nobody did. And it also allowed me to attract and retain further talent because I said, see, if you come here and you work with me for 3, 5, or work in this company, not work with me, you will actually increase your external market value. So a lot of companies basically say we don't want to give people the ability to make their names known, build their brands, build their reputation, because then they'll be
They don't
hired
want to lose
away.
them.
And I said, no. The more you do that, your company looks better because you have these stars.
Yeah.
B, because you're allowing them to build them, they don't have to go anywhere, right? And 3, when and if they do, you can attract other people because you'll be known as a star factory.
Right.
But eventually, I also come to like us as individuals that what we need to do is every day spend an hour learning. So I talk about upgrading our mental operating systems. I give talks about AI and how marketers are changing.
Right.
And I've done it for the IAB, I've done it for the ANA, I've done it for clients. And you might basically say, okay, the guy doesn't work in marketing anymore. This AI stuff happened long after he stopped working. How is this clown talking about AI in the future of marketing when he should be, I don't know, as Maurice Levy tells me, I think you're sitting like on Lake Michigan looking at the waves and wasting your time. So I said, yeah, while I'm doing that, I can also do this. Okay. So the idea is because I spend time learning every day. And so I tell everybody, you can learn every day. And you don't have to go to school. You have YouTube, podcasts, Substack, whatever you want. Play with the tools. The other one is to once in a while build a case for the exact opposite of what you think is true. And the reason that's very important is if you don't challenge yourself, you begin to believe that your flatulence smells like Chanel 5. And then you lose the way. And the more senior you are and the more successful you are, the more you need to challenge yourself because you're surrounded by a bunch of supplicants. You're also working with a whole bunch of senior people. All of you all are hanging out together, blowing air kisses to each other. And what happens is everybody gets shocked from where nobody is looking.
Right.
So I always say the future comes from the slime and not the heavens. So please, I'm not saying go to hell, but hang out with the slime and not just the heavenly people.
Oh my gosh. All right. So let me try to chunk some things out here, Rishad, because that's a lot. One of the things that's almost the inverse is that in, B2B content like this, we frequently say, how would you mentor a younger person and someone new to the industry? But they're the ones who are writing the rules now. They're the ones who are saying, yeah, no, I don't want to work that way. I want to work this way. And I think your point is that it's the leaders that need the advice.
Yes.
So now I want to get into the musical portion of our conversation. You might know that I often sing to my guests. Ask Lou Pascalis, ask our friend Carl Fremont. But you coined new lyrics to a song, and you can sing it with me. Pete Seeger, if you saw A Complete Unknown, wrote, ready? Where have all the leaders gone?
Yes.
Long time. Okay, you get the idea. I thought you were going to sing with me.
No, I'm not going to sing with you because then everybody will, you'll suddenly find that your listenership and viewership goes to zero when I start singing. So the thing that basically I would say is, in fact, so I write on Saturdays. I publish
Okay.
every Sunday. Maybe I'll write about where have all the leaders gone.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out how to actually conflate two different songs. So right now it's Mrs. Robinson and Where
Here's
Have
to
All the
you, Mrs.
Flowers
Robin.
Gone? Because in Mrs. Robinson, it's this whole line about, Joe DiMaggio, our
Yeah.
nation turns its lonely eyes to you, right? Which is where we're looking for real leaders, to a great extent. And you suddenly find that most of those leaders are from the past. But so here's my basic belief. I think that we have a crisis in modern leadership, a massive crisis. And it's one of the things that, a gentleman called Drew Yanni and us are starting a project called the Athena Project.
Yes.
And the Athena Project is basically that modern leaders need to be wide spectrum, and leaders have to think about influence, impact, and intelligence. And today, what we have is managers and bosses in a world which requires leaders. Managers are fine.
Wait,
But
what's the
bosses,
difference?
so there's a very big difference. So a manager, boss, and leader. So let me take boss versus leader, right?
Okay.
And a manager, if you're a manager, you have to have a little bit of a boss-like thing, and you have to have a little bit of a leader thing. But by a boss is someone who works from a zone of control. And a boss spends most of their time measuring, evaluating, monitoring, and checking in.
Okay. Like your time
Okay.
card.
Yeah.
Okay.
A leader works from a zone of influence. A
Oh,
leader basically thinks about how do they guide, mentor, make, sell, and build. A boss thinks they are the conductor of an orchestra where everybody plays their parts. A leader basically believes they are playing jazz and they're improvising with other people.
continuing our musical theme. I love it.
Right. So in effect, that's the
Okay.
difference. That's the difference between all right. And now the truth of the matter is everybody who's a world-class manager, if you think about it, should have a little bit of the boss like, because you can't run a company without doing some evaluating, allocating, monitoring, and measuring. But most people today are spending 70, 80% of their time doing that and less than 20% of their doing the leader. And therefore we have a crisis of leadership. And so I've always basically said one of the reasons people are not coming back to the office is they're not coming back to the bosses.
Okay.
Because they
Yeah.
don't need to be monitored and measured and told what to do because they were doing perfectly well without it. If, on the other hand, someone mentors them, guides them, leads them, builds them, okay, that's interesting. Okay. But also the question is whether you actually have to do that in a physical space called the office. That's a completely different thing too. But so in effect, we have a leadership crisis. And part of the leadership crisis, in addition to people not being leaders but being bosses, is you see that today, and this is a generational challenge that we're going to have in a very deep, deep way. So today, how quickly so many senior people in large numbers of companies ran away from their belief in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay? And I use those words. I don't use
Yes,
DEI.
not DEI.
Right? I just said you ran away from diversity, equity, and inclusion. And not only did you run away, you went to the other side, hardcore, masculine energy. That's where you went. Okay? So what does that indicate? So one, it indicates that you're a realist trying to maximize the market value of your company and be aligned with whatever the current administration is. Okay, sort of interesting. But what it also basically says is three other things. Maybe you never believed in what you said in the first place. Number two, you have a backbone made of jujubes and marshmallows. Okay, that's what you have. And three, you have completely lost the bottom two generations at work who have actually seen what you are for what you are,
Yes.
right? You are nothing but a money-tropic analog person with the warmth of a toilet seat and an imagination that doesn't go beyond your elbows.
Rishad, I love you so much right now.
Okay. And so what my whole basic belief is, what you'll have just done is you'll have created the greatest act of self-defeat. And my whole basic belief is have a sense of history.
Yeah.
And my sense of history is very clear. When you align with somebody, do the people who align with that person, do they over time benefit or do they fail?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I built my entire career by aligning with people who made people around them succeed. The Jack Clues, the Maurice Levy, etc. I was fortunate to have world-class talent who continues to, I keep connected to them. I see them all over the place years after I work with them because they succeeded and they thought I helped them succeed
Yes.
versus drag them down. So people basically said, most of the time, this guy helps us succeed. Once in a while, he's so horrible that he fails. We have to fail with him. But we succeed. So my basic belief is, if you know that everybody who's aligned with a certain person always eventually regrets it, what makes you think you're going to be any different?
Yeah.
Simple. And my whole thing is, you all have proven to me, all of you people, I always basically say, after all this money and after all this wealth, what will your parents think? What will your children think? And what do you in the middle of the night think about what you just did?
Amen. You do raise the bar for many. And as chief strategy officer, your strategy has been invaluable. Also, your finger on the pulse of what's new, what's next. And I know that you've been that leader who has risen others. I had an interview last year for this podcast with Anthony Yell, and he's the chief creative officer at Razorfish.
Yeah.
And you were previously the chairman at Razorfish. And one of the things that he talked about is that the key to thriving is a marriage of performance and brand purpose, having a mission. But he's also a believer in collaboration. And that's one of your C's. And really embracing brand purpose, that's from, the Rishad Tobaccowala playbook too. So I want to take our last few minutes and talk about purpose.
Sure.
I want to hear about the Tobaccowala Foundation.
Yep.
And then I also want to hear, since this is about media marketing and advertising, how creativity is changing and how advertising has to evolve also in this new form of leadership and work. So however and wherever you want to answer those, it's yours.
Sure. So one of the things that I've always believed is that there are two ways of thinking about strategy. One is the way I used it at Publicis, which is strategy is future competitive advantage. Okay, which is, what will your customers or clients want in the future? Who will you be competing with in the future? And against those future competitors, how will you keep and retain and grow your clients? It was really Maurice Levy and a whole bunch of other people, but I was obviously involved. That is what explains the success of the Publicis Group, is we made investments and reorganizations, which took a long time, that allowed us to be more relevant to our clients for where they're going in the future. Another way of looking at strategy is generosity. Okay. Now that is not a corporate way of looking at it, but from an individual person, it's a good way of looking at it, which is, if you can be generous with people and if you can help them whenever you can, you are likely at the end of it to do extremely well. Primarily because when you are generous, especially when there's nothing that people give back to you, right? When you're generous, you feel good. Whether it's somebody, it's not a quid pro quo, right?
You're not giving to get.
You feel good. Two, they will always remember you, because usually the people who most need generosity are sometimes, in between jobs, something's gone wrong and they reach out to you. So they'll remember you because most of these people will then recover and go and get big fat jobs. Everybody will be calling on them, but nobody returned their call when they were like, nobody was talking to them, right? So the whole idea is, when you give, what begins to happen is, it's like two songs, since you're in this musical thing. One is Eric Clapton, which basically is plant your love and let it grow, right? And the other one is my favorite group, supposedly last lines of the last song, which is from the Beatles. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
And so if you consider that, my basic belief is where people say, how come in your second career you're thriving and you're just working by yourself? I said, it looks like I'm working by myself, but I'm not working by myself. Okay. I got lots of people who are working with me and helping me. They just don't
Yes.
happen to be on my payroll, and I might not be happen to be on their payroll, which to a great extent, I continue to succeed in part because while I no longer am an employee of Publicis, they work very hard to support me. Like the podcast that I host, they produce, for instance, right? And they give me speaking leads, etc. And if somebody basically says, you're all by yourself, who's going to vouch for you? I'll say, well, you can call the CEOs, current or past, and they can vouch for me. That helps as a company of one. Okay. But what basically happens is they're being generous to me because I was always there and always, whenever I was asked to do things, I said, I mean, Maurice would basically say, often we ask you to do things which you really don't want to do, but you say, okay. Now you want to do this silly second career, we have to say, okay. But the other one is because I help people all around, guess who those people are now? They run companies all across America and the world, right? So when they are looking for a speaker, who do you think they'll call?
Rishad Tobaccowala.
Right. And, when somebody says, hey, read this guy's Substack, buy his book, right? It was kind of really interesting. And easy example, the 4 CEOs of the Publicis media companies,
Yes.
4 of them, all 4 are women. 3 of the 4 used to work for me.
Oh.
Okay. And 2 of the 4, I think I kept or got back into the group after they left. Okay. And one of them basically said, hey, can we do like a town hall meeting for my company? I said, fine. So she said, how much is it going to cost you? I said, I don't charge people who work for me. Don't be ridiculous. Okay. But what she did was she basically bought 700 copies of my book in hardcover for everybody. Okay. Which helped my sales, right, to a great extent. And that was basically, hey, you're doing this not for charging anything. And she said, I want everybody to read this book, right? And then we had a conversation. And I said, this happens again and again and again. And so the idea is generosity is strategy. So basically, I tell people, hey, listen, stop thinking that this is a zero-sum game. Stop thinking about I, me, mine. And if you actually want to think about yourself, think about others, because it's actually generosity in a very strange way is the most selfish thing you can do. Okay. By helping other people, you will eventually find that they will help you, whether you need it or not. And we always need it at some stage in some different way, right? That's number one. And so part of it is like the Tobaccowala Foundation is basically there are always people who need help. And so my whole stuff is I want to run a foundation that doesn't have any cost structure outside of 2-3 people who are in India who are outside of a couple of things that we have to pay because we need an accountant and stuff like that. Everybody else is pro bono, very senior people. And we don't launch our own things. We help other people. So what happens is for every rupee we get, we put 97 paise to use. Most charities, that number is 70.
Yes.
Yeah, we put 97. The reason is, A, we don't raise any money. The money is all from the foundation. So we don't go running around raising money. There's no politics. It's very easy. Most of the time, we're just having drinks and food, when we get together in India or other places. And we basically say, what do we want to do? So we had a theme. I wrote a strategy. The strategy was enlightenment. So what do? We help people. We lighten their burden. If you're ill, we give you money, right? If you are turning blind, we help you to, give you new lenses and things like that. That's a form of enlightenment. We invest in education where people are having difficulty getting to a school. So we buy buses for them so they can get to school. So enlightenment is you can see better, you can get more educated, and we can lighten the burden of either that or old age. And then we said we're only going to do it for these 7 or 8 organizations. They all have to be 100 miles from Bombay so we can go visit them and we know what's going on. And it was very, very simple. And it's just the way we run it. But it's basically giving back. And it was primarily because like my parents grew up poor and they eventually turned out to be very successful Indian way. This is before modern Indian way. Today's modern Indian way is billionaire. In those days, it wasn't that. They always said, we should never forget where we came from, which is them. Okay. And they would learn under streetlights. So that's why I thought illumination.
Oh,
okay. So you can basically sort of tell a story. And so in effect, I took a story to a data-driven thing. So we make investments which are highly data-driven. but there has to be a storyline that connects them, because otherwise, what are you doing? So now let's come back to your question on marketing
And
and
I can see where
creativity.
story comes in. Okay.
Right. For all practical purposes, storytelling is data with a soul. Okay. And in many ways, everything about technology is about stories. So I believe technology helps stories. So, for instance, what was the first technology we ever had was fire. And when we had fire, in addition to keeping ourselves warm and being able to cook food, we gathered around the fire and we told each other stories. Every story, every movie is based on two simple things: a stranger comes to town, or you go on a journey.
Oh, I never thought
Okay.
of it that way.
So I will show you that every advance in technology is an advance in storytelling. And I'll do it again and again and again. The difference is the modern marketing and media world, we got the plumbing right first before we got the poetry. So
We
most
got
of
the
modern
plumbing
technology,
right?
the plumbing right. So the plumbing is we found the right person at the right place at the right time,
Okay.
but we didn't know what to say to them. And that's because until you had things like generative AI, you couldn't actually create amazing, customized, personalized stories. But now you can at scale. Until then, you found the right person, the right place, the right time, and told them the same thing. And that actually hurt brands, because if I take my wife to Venice and on a
Yeah.
moonlit night we're in a gondola and then I talk about plumbing, she'll kick me out onto the water, right? But that's what most brands were doing. We basically were not optimizing the creative or the storytelling because we couldn't. We'd say, okay, it's raining outside, buy a Big Mac. You like pink, so the ad looks like pink. That's not storytelling. That's versioning, okay,
Right.
of the same thing. And so I think we've come to a place where stories will matter. But more importantly, because of AI, we're living in a world of AI plus HI, where HI is human insight, human imagination, human ingenuity, human inventiveness. And as a result, coming back to my first book, the future is about story and the spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet is increasingly going to be done by machines. And they are also going to enable new ways of telling stories. Okay. But in effect, like yesterday, so I have my learning thing.
You
I
learn
did.
something every day, right?
I actually put an hour aside to learn. Okay.
I love that.
Yesterday, I spent an hour understanding how Substack has become multimedia oriented. So I write on a Substack.
Right.
Substack basically began as print. So now they had a big article called "The Sights and Sounds of Substack."
Yes.
And so there are live concerts on Substack. Okay. So I was
Right.
listening to Patti Smith, right? There are people giving talks. And my whole stuff is, hey, this has become a multimedia thing. And then it's also become sort of a social feed thing, but a social feed that's not algorithmically manipulated and it's not full of, right now, the social feeds of X and Meta, and I subscribe to everything at the highest level, and I don't say anything sucks. But right now, I spend very little time on the feeds of X and Meta because for every minute I spend, 45 seconds of it is stupidity. Okay. And so I'd rather spend time where 45 seconds is non-stupidity because I've only got so much time. So of course I look at them because by the nature of what I have to do, I have to be aware of them. And so people say, you're like a credentialed user of all of these things. Yeah, I say, I want to see the best of it. I use Grok. I use the best of it. So I said, I don't go say like pox on that house. I say that house seems to be not particularly attractive, but I'll keep visiting it because maybe I should build a case for the opposite of what I believe. Maybe I'm wrong, etc. So that's where we are today. And I really believe creativity is going to be more and more important. And it's about connecting dots in new ways. I also believe marketing is going to grow more and more important. And so I tell everybody who's in the world of marketing, in the world of media, in the world of creativity, the field is going to become bigger and bigger. But think about this. I think there are going to be more and more work to be done, but there are going to be fewer and fewer jobs to be filled.
Wow.
Okay. And therefore, start honing your skills and craft to get work done versus figuring out how to get a job. And you might say, what are you talking about? And I'll say, go to the film and entertainment industry. there's almost nobody who works at a studio. They go from gig to gig,
Right.
from a movie to a television show, right? You have lots of work to be done, but you don't have jobs. So similarly, like in the world of music in the old days, you would have to go where Mozart was, or you had a phonograph record, or you had a compact disc.
Yeah.
Today, a piece of music is in the cloud. You can listen to it in the way you want, so you don't have to listen to Sgt. Pepper's Hearts Club Band the way it was. You can listen to Day in a Life next to I Can't Get No Satisfaction.
Right.
So what are you doing? Music is there. There's lots more music today, but there are far fewer CDs and vinyl records, etc. Right? So those are jobs. Music is the work. And today, guess how work gets done, or how is music heard? Through a playlist, which is created based on what you feel like. I want to run, I want a playlist for that. I want to relax, I want a playlist for that. And then different people combine to give you that. That is the future of work. That is the future of advertising. That is the future of marketing.
Rishad.
So I'll leave you with that.
Mic drop.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I don't want to blow any of your book sales, but just to recap the ending, which is really
Yes.
powerful, and to kind of recap what you said, you talk about prioritizing inspiration. Since
Yes.
let me read this. There's no tech that can inspire people to work more creatively and more productively. We're emotional beings.
Yes.
So we can't be treated like an algorithm. And you also encourage continuous learning, as you've illustrated. Ask him about beluga whales and waffle houses. That's learning too. And I think that this podcast episode has been something that I will play back over and over for my continuous learning and inspiration. So
Well,
thank you
very
so much
Ibi.
for
Thank you for
joining.
the opportunity. Absolutely. Thank
My
you.
pleasure. And I will add a link to the book. And Rishad is also incredibly generous, and his Substack, which is called The Future Does Not Fit into the Containers of the Past,
Yes.
is available on Substack for free as a compilation of that. And his podcast is What Next? And that's available for free. So again, follow him.
Thank
listen.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishad.
You bet.
So to wrap it up, just a little reminder that a good podcast doesn't have to be hard, but it ain't easy. I can help you launch yours, market yours, or host yours. And if you want to support this fabulous free content, you can find me at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal, anywhere on social media, and reach out at mossappeal.com. And a big shout out to John Clayton for the theme music. But truly, thank you for listening, learning, and sharing Insider Interviews with me, E.B. Moss.